All right, well, good morning. I want to welcome everyone to the Wednesday, September 25th, 2024 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. The time is 9:03. For public comment today, after I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button located in the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during the meeting, please email your comments to Solvi Sable at ssabol@pctpa.net. Thank you. And Jenny, would you lead us in the flag salute today, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Could we get a roll call, please?
Andriotta? Here. Broadway?
Here.
Dowden Calvillo?
Present.
Holmes?
Yes.
Jones? Nisley?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is agenda review. Matt, are there any modifications to today's agenda?
No modifications, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our next item is AB 2449. And Matt, do we have any action necessary?
No action relative to AB 2449.
Wonderful. Item E is approval of the minutes from our August 28th, 2024 meeting. Those minutes were provided to us electronically in our packets as well as posted online. Are there any modifications needed or noted on the minutes?
I have none, Mr. Chair.
None from the board. All right. And any from staff? No? All right. Does anyone from the public wish to have any changes made to the minutes? Anyone in chambers? There being none, do we have anyone online that wishes to comment on the minutes? All right, I'll bring it back
approval
for action. Thank you.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any further comment? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstentions? There being none?
I wasn't.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're going to, Jenny is going to abstain. She was not at the meeting. And so we have one abstention. And you have that noted, and it is approved. All right, next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for, and I do want to note that we did have a member of the board join us. And did you want to note that, Solvi? Noted, okay, perfect. So Dan, thank you for joining us. I understand we had traffic challenges, so thank you for being here.
Somebody ought to do something about it.
We do appreciate it.
Wish we knew a board that could deal with that kind of thing.
All right, the next item on our agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on items not on our agenda today. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone here in chambers who wishes to comment on an item not on our agenda today? Please approach.
Good morning, Chair Broadway and members of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. I'm Michael Barnbaum, and last month I was present to introduce to your board the Watt I-80 enhancement project, a gateway to Placer and Sacramento County public transit services. The groundbreaking took place in July. It was also mentioned in the executive director's report at the last meeting, with a lot of elected officials on the federal, state, and local level attending, in addition to folks at the Federal Transit Administration. There is a project update that I wanted to give forth to you today. And as of Monday of this week, there has been a move of one of the bus stops. And while it will not affect your operations necessarily for Placer County Transit, as the bus operator will still go to the regular bus stop at the lower level next to the train. But for their riders who need to access routes 1, 84, 26, and 93 along the southbound end of Watt Avenue, the stairwell and the elevator will be closed up to the Sunday before Thanksgiving. The bus stop has been moved south of the transit center during construction of lanes and improvements over to the Red Roof Inn on Watt Avenue. So you have a paper in front of you. If you didn't get one, I have additional copies, correct? And it is fairly self-explanatory about what passengers will need to do. But for those on Zoom and online that don't have this paper and don't have the privilege today of being in the room, just note you'll have to go to the northbound elevator or staircase, meaning walking underneath Watt Avenue, go up the only elevator and staircase available, access the traffic light, cross back over to southbound Watt Avenue, and access the bus stop at the Red Roof Inn for the next couple of months. As a commitment to your staff and to Roseville Transit staff, I have taken updated photos today of the lower level and the ongoing construction activity, and have been sent to the executive director of your agency via text message, along with the director of operations for the Alternative Transportation Division at the City of Roseville. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, thank you for that update. We appreciate it. All right, is there anyone else in chambers that wishes to comment on a non-agenda item? Do we have anyone online? All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. I do want to note that Member Hadeschelt has joined us, so welcome. All right, the next item on our agenda is our consent calendar. We have 3 items on our agenda. These items are routine and non-controversial. Does anyone from the board wish to pull an item from consent?
Not I.
Being none, does anyone from the public in chambers wish to pull an item? Anyone online? No, I'll bring it back to the board for action.
Mr. Chair, I will move approval.
Dowden Calvio second, before the mayor.
Yeah,
Gonna
but-
have Alice, I was gonna move that Alice move it.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar item. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed or abstentions? There being none, passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item is item H. That is the fiscal year 2024 overall work program and budget. We have our first amendment, and Jody is going to present that today.
Good morning, Chair and Board. Today I'm presenting to you the Amendment 1 of the 425 OWP and budget. It's a bit earlier than usual because we received 2 new grants, and one of them needed to be added for Caltrans so we can have a notice to proceed on it. The first grant that we received is the Placer County Evacuation and Transportation Resiliency Plan. It's a multi-year grant for $630,000. There is a match requirement that is being paid for by Placer County Office of Emergency Services. For this current fiscal year, we're planning to expend approximately $215,000. The next grant we received was the countywide zero emissions vehicle infrastructure plan grant, and that is another multi-year grant award at about $1 million, and we are planning to expend $280,000 this year on a zero emission vehicle consultant. And other notable changes was some carryover from the I-80 Ox Lanes construction and support for $79,000, and some slight adjustments with staffing and benefits. And this is a look at how the Amendment 1 compares with the final budget. It is balanced, and we have a $168,000 surplus. And just a look at how we receive our revenues, I just wanted to mention that 90% of these funds are on a reimbursement basis, so cash is king, as they say, so we need to be able to have cash on hand to pay for it before we will receive reimbursement. And here is a breakdown of our expenditures. 96% of that is going to direct cost for projects, and the remaining 4% is for operational cost of the agency. And here's a look, a very busy slide of all of our work elements. You'll see those ones that have the highest amounts in them are the I-80 aux lanes, it's the construction and support cost, and the sidewalk gap closure for Highway 49. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. Unless there's any questions, this has been reviewed by TAC and Caltrans.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jody. Any questions from the board?
Happy to receive a report that indicates we have additional funds, so congratulations on those grants.
I have a couple of comments when it's appropriate.
All right, we'll wait for questions. Wonderful. All right, is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on this item here in chambers? There being none, anyone online? No? All right, I will bring it back to the board for comments.
Yeah, I'll just note, I'm glad to see the fire resiliency and evacuation plan. Director Dowden Calvillo. Almost as hard to say as Urushio. Yeah, I know, it's almost as hard. And Director Nisley and Director Jones, and I saw at SACOG last week. I know. Eldorado's, they did a presentation on that, so it's good to see. Thanks for getting it in our overall work plan here. And then Director Jones and I, Director Jones and I? Who was it? Matt, who was it on Tuesday? It was just Tuesday. Or Monday, I'm sorry, it was just Monday.
It was Supervisors Landon and Gore.
Yeah, not even Supervisor Jones.
Wow.
And I was there. So we made some significant progress on the South Sutter, South Placer work element, so just want to comment on that.
Wonderful. Any other comments from the board? There being none, could we get an action, please?
I move approval.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve this item. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed or abstentions? There being none, passes unanimously. Our next item is item I, that's the comprehensive operational analysis for Auburn Transit and Placer County Transit. I believe Mike Costa is going to present that today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members of the board and public. Mike Costa. I'm happy to bring this item to the board today. I'd also like to acknowledge I'm being joined by our project team members, Ken and Eric. Eric will be actually presenting some of the presentation a little later on. And then I'm also joined here today by Placer County Transit's manager, Jamie Wright, behind me, and she might be available to answer any questions that the board may have about existing services. So why are we here today, and what is the comprehensive operational analysis? This is an effort that actually started last year around the summertime. I would say it officially kicked off in August, but this has been worked on even prior to August of last year. And essentially what the COA's goals and main objectives were to do were to really improve the transit services collectively throughout the South Placer region, recognizing that even prior to the pandemic, transit ridership was going down and there were service disruptions and service challenges that our operators were dealing with. And so the COA was approved by this board to look at ways in which we could improve transit services overall and make them more efficient, more integrated throughout the South Placer region post-pandemic, which was a great opportunity to do so. There will be an action at the end of this presentation, and that action is to accept the completion of this plan. However, it's important to note that accepting the completion of this plan does not necessarily require implementation of all of the recommended service changes that are being proposed that we will walk the board through. And again, it's important to recognize that this is just the first step. This is the COA, which establishes the service network plan for this effort. However, after the COA, and I'll talk about this later in the presentation, there will be a short-range transit plan that staff will be working on with your local jurisdictions and our transit partners to implement this plan, and so implement the recommended service changes moving forward. So with that, I'd like to also acknowledge the extensive work and collaboration that has been done with all of our regional partners, both internal and external stakeholders. We did form a very specific project TAC, or Technical Advisory Committee, for this effort, and that included all of representation from all of our local jurisdictions, as well as our transit operators and some social service agencies as well, and members of the public even from different communities in our region. We also worked with our Transit Operators Working Group, which again includes all of our local jurisdictions, and we had very extensive collaboration with our transit partners, including the City of Roseville, that is conducting their own comprehensive operational analysis, but we worked very closely with them to ensure that our recommended service changes aligned with the plans that we understood they were doing as well. So we shared a lot of information between those partners. It's also important to note that we tried to make this process as transparent as possible to the public and to all of our stakeholders. We established a specific project website for this project that began all the way in the beginning of our assessment and analysis phase of this project. All of our technical memorandum that we prepared in support of the document that's included in your packet today was posted online, so that was always available to the members of the public, including all of our survey data and all of our engagement outreach materials were always posted on the public website. We did also conduct 3 rounds of outreach. We conducted one in the fall to look at community perceptions on what they wanted to see in transit. We conducted an engagement survey in the springtime to look at weighing trade-offs between service coverage and frequency issues with the public. And then we had an open public comment period that had 2 virtual workshops for the draft COA in June. So that is, or excuse me, July. So that is something that, again, we wanted to incorporate as many opportunities for public input as possible. And then we also had a focus group established with the Latino Leadership Council to look at equity issues regarding some of our transit services. So that encompassed all of our engagement outreach efforts. Our recommended service plan that's presented to you today, which we'll walk you through, is something, again, that we wanted to work very closely with our partners on and get their buy-off on. So we established with our TAC almost bi-monthly check-in meetings where we went over the technical memos, and we made sure that we had general support and concurrence throughout this process from all of our stakeholders and partners. This plan, of course, is not perfect. It doesn't represent everything that we could do, but it does take into account the lens and the feasibility consideration of what could we potentially do with the money that we have. So that's important to recognize as well, is that it really does look at trying to be maximized with efficiency with the funding that we had. And then we also looked at a whole slew of transit service options that are contained in our technical memorandum that are not presented in your packet today, but it is something that if the board is interested in looking at, they could go to our website, and of course members of the public can look through all of the different analysis that we did to lead up to the service recommendations that we present today. And we evaluated the ones that are being presented today based on several different performance criteria and metrics that, again, were to determine the viability and feasibility of these services moving forward with consideration of all aspects, both local support aspects and financial aspects as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Eric Bird with WSP. He's part of our project team that helped us with this effort, and he's going to walk us through the proposed service recommendations.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Eric Bird. I'm a transition planner with WSP, assisting PCTPA with the COA. I'm going to go over the recommended service changes Mike mentioned that are included in this version of the COA. First, I'm going to start with the on-demand services in the Auburn and Colfax area, where we're recommending further coordination between Auburn Transit, and Placer County Transit to make on-demand services easier for customers to use. In this area, we're also recommending expanding the service area to serve the Bowman area, a bit further east of the existing service area. And we're also recommending focusing Placer County Transit on-demand service to focus on the western portion of the area west of State Route 49, and Auburn Transit to focus on the eastern portion east of the highway. Overall, we are anticipating these changes to result in in about an 8% increase in boardings for these on-demand services and a savings in operating costs of 2% that can be reinvested into the network. For Route 30, we are recommending extending the route to downtown Auburn across I-80. The specific routing will be determined due to potential operational constraints in that area. The streets are a bit narrow in that area, so while we, as you can see on the map here, we do have sort of a general idea of where we want that route to operate. We will take another look during the SRTP to finalize that routing and make sure that it's working for the buses operating in that area. For this change, we're anticipating a 18% increase in boardings for Route 30 and only a 3% increase in operating costs for the route. For Route 10, we are recommending increasing frequency on the route from 60 minutes to 30 minutes between 9 a.m. and noon on weekdays due to particularly high ridership during those times. We're also recommending, as you can see in the map on the right, a slight change in the westbound alignment to match the eastbound alignment and to add on-street stops at the existing Taylor Road Park and Ride for connections with Roseville Transit Services that also serve that stop. For these changes, we're anticipating a 26% increase in boardings for the route and a 12% increase in operating costs as well. For Route 60, we are recommending discontinuing the first AM westbound trip and last eastbound trip and the portion of the route between Auburn Station and Colfax Depot due to particularly low ridership for those two trips and that portion of the route on the eastern side. For these changes, we're anticipating a 26% decrease in boardings for Route 60. However, we're also anticipating a savings of around 46% in operating costs. Again, that can be reinvested into the network for higher performing routes and services. For Route 20, we are recommending splitting the route into two at the Roseville Galleria and increasing frequencies for the two routes from 60 minutes to 30 minutes between noon and 6 p.m. Again, due to the particularly high ridership that we see during those times. As you can see in the map on the right, the eastern route will operate between the Galleria and Sierra College, while the western route will operate between Galleria and the Park and Ride lot on Industrial Avenue in Lincoln. We're anticipating these changes to result in a fairly robust 74% increase in boardings for the route and a 45% increase in operating costs as well. For Route 70, we are recommending extending the route slightly to serve the Park and Ride lot on Industrial Avenue in Lincoln to provide connections to Route 20 for those changes that I just mentioned. And as you can see in the map, we're also recommending serving 1st Street and 3rd Street between R Street and Joyner Parkway. And for the Lincoln Dial-A-Ride service, we are recommending adding more weekday service to accommodate periods of where we see the heaviest ridership. We are not recommending any changes to Route 80 at this time. We're anticipating the changes for Route 70 to increase in a 7% increase in boardings and 2% increase in operating costs for the route. And for the Lincoln Dial-A-Ride changes, we are anticipating a 29% increase in boardings and 21% increase in operating costs for that service. Lastly, for the Granite Bay Dial-A-Ride service, we are recommending providing service for 4 continuous hours during weekday midday times. Right now, there are two 2-hour periods where service is provided, and we're wanting to make that a continuous window to make it easier for folks to use the service. And we're also recommending for Roseville Transit and Placer County Transit to develop an agreement for Roseville Transit's Aero service to serve this area. And as Mike mentioned, we've had a lot of collaboration with the Roseville Transit team during the COA process, so we've been beginning those discussions throughout the development of the COA. For these changes, we're not anticipating any impacts on ridership or cost. That wraps up all of the recommended service changes. I'm going to pass it back to Mike to provide an overall summary and more information on next steps and the SRTP.
Thank you very much, Eric. So as Eric walked you through, again, I want to point out that those estimates on ridership and costs are preliminary, high-level estimates. One of the things that we would like to do is in the next phase of this project, which is the short-range transit plan, we will be diving more into actual operating costs in consideration of all capital needs as well as looking at fine-tuning that operating number. But overall, our estimated changes with all of our recommended service changes that you just saw would result in approximately 26% increase in boardings, as well as an increase of approximately 8% in total operating costs for the collective system. It's important to note that when we started this project, actually back when I brought this informational item to the board in March, not March, but earlier this year, there was a discussion about looking at tiered scenarios of cost assumptions, one being a revenue or cost neutral position, one looking at a 10% cost increase, and then a scenario looking at fiscally unconstrained recommendations. And so we stuck within that 10%, 0 to 10% cost range that we preliminarily assessed and brought forward to this board back in spring. The other thing, again, to note is that as we move forward, we will take the recommended service changes from Roseville that they're working on right now and integrate them with our proposed service plan changes, which we've been, again, working very closely with Roseville to ensure that our recommendations align. The other thing that I'd like to note is moving forward in the short-range transit plan, we will be looking at the Rapid Link project a little more, because that Rapid Link project, which was formerly known as the South Placer Transit Express service, being administered by our partners at the city of Roseville, that will be coming online most likely next year, sometime in the spring or summer. And so we'll be looking at, again, fine-tuning that service overlaid on top of our existing network and looking at performance criteria for that service so that as a pilot program, we can gauge the effectiveness and efficiency of that service moving forward to determine its ultimate either expansion or elimination after the 3-year pilot program ends. We'll be looking at marketing strategies in the short-range transit plan, as well as looking at different coordinated programs and efforts to further support our recommended service changes that we propose today. So with that, the board's being requested today to accept the comprehensive operational analysis for Auburn Transit and Placer County Transit as complete and support the recommended COA service plan's implementation in partnership with an agreement by the region's transit operators and local jurisdictions receiving transit services. And the reason why that second part of the acceptance is in there is because it is ultimately up to the determination of the local jurisdictions that receive transit services. For example, Lincoln and Rockland receive services from Placer County Transit to establish a service agreement. And so that service agreement between those entities, we are not superseding that action. We are just proposing recommended changes today and asking the board to accept this COA as complete so that we can move forward to the short-range transit planning effort. This was presented to our project TAC, which concurred with our recommendation. And with that, this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Great, thank you, Mike. Questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
On Route 60, how was the return to office factored in to project? Because, I think Amazon, week and a half ago, announced that in 2025, they would be expecting everyone to return to the office. And so how was that factored in?
That's a very good question, Chair Member, or Mr. Board Member. We actually looked at the existing demand for commuter service. The Route 60 is the Placer County Transit commuter route. Right now, there is a definite need for at least one of those buses. Placer County Transit operates two in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, so basically 2 round trips. We're still continuing to examine that because the return to work is still changing. We are proposing to eliminate one of those round trips based on the current demand that we see. However, with that being said, I know our partners at Placer County Transit are going to be conducting an onboard ridership survey in the coming months, and that will inform our short-range transit plan efforts that we'll be working on after this to determine ultimately if that second round trip is actually needed or if it can go away. But right now we're just seeing demand for about 1 round trip.
So you could pivot without coming back here, getting approval or anything like that. That's great to know because I suspect ridership's going to go up.
Other questions from the board? So my question in regard to, and I'm looking at Route 20, but all of the estimated annual operating costs impacts. So the sources for covering those increased costs, what are the expected sources?
So right now, the city of Rockland utilizes predominantly its Transportation Development Act, or TDA, funding to support the current transit services that exist in the city today. And that goes for our partners at Lincoln and our other partners that are receiving Placer County Transit services as well. Predominantly, those sources of funds are broken into multiple categories: state transit assistance funds, local transportation funds, state of good repair funds. Right now, as I understand it, the state transit assistance funds, which can only be used for public transit services, those are all going towards supporting operating costs in our local jurisdictions. The local transportation funds, on the other hand, are funding sources that our jurisdictions, after the unmet transit needs process, typically can use those funds for other streets and roads purposes. So with that being said, if a local jurisdiction, in partnership again with the transit operator, decides to implement some of these service recommendations, they could potentially utilize some of their existing local transportation funds that are otherwise going to streets and roads purposes. Or there could be other financial sources that come into play outside of the Transportation Development Act funds that come into play, whether through federal stimulus or federal transit administration funds or even grant funds that Placer County Transit uses to offset costs that go towards those jurisdictions, which is something that is factored in today whenever Placer County receives federal or other sources of funding. Those are factored into offsetting some of the operating costs for the local jurisdictions where they provide services to.
Okay, but those sources you mentioned at the end, we have no specifics tied to an expectation of any type of additional sources of revenue coming into the municipalities to support that. So, for example, our CIP is tied specifically to those funds that are coming in relative to specific projects relating to transit and transportation in Rockland. So we would have to shift funding in order to address, in this case, $695,000 additional expense for our municipality.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. One last question from my chair. The ridership increase, the projections, because those are our projections, how are those arrived at?
That's a very good question. I'd like to see if Ken or Eric might be able to help address that question, because that was work that was done in partnership with our WSP team.
Yeah, this is Eric. So we looked at things such as population density and sort of transit propensity areas. So areas with higher minority communities and things like that that might be more likely to use transit, and how and existing ridership levels as well. So, and then applying some sort of a factor in terms of whether we were extending a route, using that percentage of how much we were extending that route by the existing ridership and things like that. So they're very much order of magnitude estimates just to see how much potential ridership would arise from these changes. And they were used in proportion to the amount of changes that we were implementing. Again, whether we were extending a route by a mile or something like that, we would then be taking the existing ridership and also the population of the area that it would be extending to, and using some sort of a proportion, again, or ratio to multiply that by.
Okay,
Can I follow up?
sure.
Based on a rural setting, I mean, what I heard you say was very formulaic, but maybe not in the form of a question, Bruce. How did you look at a footprint which is rural and urban and calculate that?
Yeah, so we developed, we analyzed the system and kind of broke it down into different types of services. So we looked at we grouped services by sort of more urban inner city routes such as Route 10 or Route 20. And then we also had different standards and different thresholds for Route 40 and Route 50, which are a bit more of the rural serving areas, as you mentioned. So we had different calculations based off of the different routes that were being served. And also different calculations as well for the on-demand services as well. So while the process that I initially described sounded as we were just using a blanket approach, we did have something that was context sensitive based off of the different routes and the areas that they were serving.
And then did you validate in previous work, not just for this agency, but other agencies, is there a validation process that your projections were within order of magnitudes accurate or inaccurate?
Yeah, I think that's probably something that we'll revisit during the SRTP as we start to, again, kind of take these changes and start to finalize them a bit more. I think this was right now just to give us an estimate of if we were to make these changes that we would be seeing improvements, what would be, as I mentioned, that kind of high level order of magnitude. And then I think as we move to the SRTP process, that's where we'll start to validate those estimates and start to do things such as having work with PCT and Auburn Transit and of course Roosevelt Transit to validate our findings, which we've been doing as well. We've been doing throughout the process. We've been working hand in hand with them to make sure that all of our estimates kind of look in line with what they're seeing right now in terms of where they're operating and the riders that they're serving. So it will be a continual process in terms of refining those estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that. Certainly in looking at our transit solutions and when we're making these type of recommendations, we look at the costs associated with it and the potential for driving ridership. That's really the ultimate goal, is driving the ridership. But I want to ensure that when we're looking at such a large dollar amount that we also associate that directly with ridership. Can you tell me, Matt, or a member of the team, what was the total ridership for the Sierra College solution in the last year that we had that we measured it?
Yeah, I'll ask Mike. The last number I saw was about 30,000, but that's an old number. There's an update.
So as of June of this past year, and that would be the end of the second year of the pilot program with Sierra College, we've provided approximately 50,000 free rides to the Sierra College students. And a predominant amount of those rides are actually provided on Placer County Transit's Route 10 and Route 20.
Okay. And the reason I asked that question is in looking at the 42,319, it seems like an awfully high number relative to when I look at these routes, even when you expand that to 30 versus 60 minutes. Just the numbers seem very high to me. And again, I'm trying to correlate the return on the investment and how we're moving the dollars. So, okay, thank you for that. One more question for you, Mike. There's been some discussion in relationship to engagement and how we work through this process. The public engagement and what is normal in relationship to that, and what did we do relative to public engagement throughout this process? I know it was a fairly long period of time, which you explained at the start of your presentation, but can you help us understand what level of direct public engagement we had and how that information was used?
Sure. So if I may kind of address that directly, we did conduct 3 official rounds of public engagement, one in the fall. Again, that was looking at gauging the public's appetite for what types of transit services do they want to see. And that was a survey effort, both on board our buses with existing riders, as well as an external survey that was available to any member of the public to weigh in on factors of, here's what I want in transit services throughout the region. That was the first round that we did. We assessed that information alongside data that we also used throughout this process to look at travel demand patterns. We looked at anonymized cell phone data. That's something that us transit and transportation planners now get to use. And so we could see where travel patterns were occurring. So we tried to marry where we saw public comments and support for different types of services with where we were seeing actual travel patterns happen and different source generators of those travel patterns, schools being a large source generator, large retail centers being a large source generator, low-income residential properties being a source generator. So that was all done in kind of the first phase of the project. Then we also started developing at that point that network performance metric standards that Eric alluded to, where we contextualized each route within the environment that it ran in. And we established unique performance metrics and standards for those routes. That was done in order to evaluate the current efficiency of the route, again, in pairing with the comments we heard and the data that we had. From that point, we then went back out to the public in spring to gauge their appetite for trading off certain things. Like, would they rather see an expansion of service, or would they rather see an improvement in frequency? That was kind of one of the biggest trade-offs that we had to weigh in on, because we didn't have money for everything. So we got some feedback in that area as well. Then we established the actual service recommendations and had a draft plan released to the public in July. We had 2 virtual meetings with the public, as well as those focus groups that I mentioned, with a specific emphasis with the community, the Latino Leadership Council, and engagement on equity issues. And then we also, of course, took any comments we received and evaluated those to see if they would change some of our recommended service changes with what's presented today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I did read in the report that you're going to go back to, so Auburn Transit will have the opportunity to approve this as well. So just as a heads up, I know that in the proposal, which I support based on the ridership, is the recommendation to permanently discontinue the Auburn Loop and the Confluent Shuttle. And I know that there are a couple of members on my city council that feel very strongly about maintaining those loops, even though staff have indicated that there's been like literally 7 riders. And the fact that Auburn On Demand does service those areas just fine. There's no problem with that. So just kind of wanted to give a heads up on that, we'll see what happens in October when it comes to the city council. But there is, even though, again, the ridership is just, single digits, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, but in any event.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the board? There being none, we'll open it up to public comment. Is there anyone here in chambers who wishes to speak on this item?
Yes, my name is Peter Edmund. I actually have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to hit some high points in 30 seconds. One quick note at the beginning. The ridership today, and it's true for PCT, is 36% below FY19. There's been no efforts whatsoever to bring it back to what I would call a base level, just before the pandemic. There's no marketing in Rockland. It's a woeful bus stop things. They're in the wrong location. They don't meet Title VII requirements. Somebody with a foreign language can't read them. There's no international icon. There's no bus stop number route. It's terrible. And sometimes there's 3 signs on one pole. Research shows that 15 to 20% of ridership could go up if you had an acceptable amenities program for bus stops where people can see that the agency cared about transit, which they don't. And this applies both to Placer County Transit is equally at risk because they are responsible for providing a full transit system, not just the buses. They need to provide some marketing support and some support in terms of amenities. I call them and say, I'd like to provide some brochures to some apartment complexes who say they've never heard about transit. They're on the route, never heard about transit. They don't have any brochures to hand out. One lady there said in 25 years, nobody has ever approached her about public transit. Rockland doesn't care about transit, but at least Placer County Transit needs to do what FTA requires them to do, establish standards for urban systems. They have not done that, and they are not in compliance with FTA regulations. I'm a 14-year resident of Rockland. I've been investigating Placer County Transit Services for the past 3 years as a citizen. For the past year, served as a citizen member of the Project TAC. And I'm losing my time. I want you to look at the first page of what I handed out. It shows the fatal flaw of Route 20. Ridership will actually go down in Rockland with this. They've put providing a 7.9-mile one-way loop. It will, if you go from West Rockland to Sierra College, it'll now take 7 times longer than auto travel. 7 times. That would not be acceptable to any transit operator in the entire country. The other one is, if you're, it's actually in an area where I live, if you get on a bus and go to high school, Rockland High School, you can't get back. There's no round trip possible because of the one-way loop. You can't make a round trip. There's no way that any of this ridership is going to, increased ridership is going to occur. I have no illusions about what's going to happen with this vote, but this is the worst transit plan I have ever seen, and I've seen many in my lifetime. This is the worst. And I'm talking just primarily about the Rockland area. But there's been no involvement at all with the city of Rockland or Placer.
Mr. Eklund, I need you to wrap
So
up
I'm
your
sorry.
comments. Thank you. Please approach.
Good morning, Michael Barnbaum again. I've been involved on this project since last year. Had an in-person meeting with Mike. Been involved a lot of communication on this over the phone, via email. The project is, as it states, a very comprehensive work plan, and it is not an overnight job to do. This takes several hours, weeks, months to come to what has been presented to you today. To the presenters' comments, and I'll echo much, if not all of them, it is not necessarily a finished product, because now the next phase of this is going to start soon with the short-range transit plans and developing very specific things and cost estimates along with it. So if I were up on the dais, I would make a recommendation to accept the staff presentation today. But like your comment said, and I would word it as return with any amendments based on board member and audience member comments. The Route 60 is a good example. One thing that hit me was the partnership currently in place between the San Joaquin JPA, Capital Corridor JPA, and El Dorado Transit that provides service between Sacramento Valley Station and South Lake Tahoe. Perhaps Route 60 could be the next one to go into such a partnership, and it would serve the stations from Colfax down to Sacramento Valley Station, considering that rail service is so constrained because of rules intact by Union Pacific, that you can get open door ridership and people can ride the bus without the necessity of having a train ticket in place. So that's something to think about and to bring back at a future meeting as well. And then Route 10, we've always talked about the weekend service, Sunday service, just with anything. I think that's another friendly amendment to bring back, as like the presenter said, it's not perfect. But with that, I'll close and say I would put a motion to accept the presentation and bring back this to the friendly amendments and monitor what happens in 6 weeks, particularly with Measure B. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else in chambers who wishes to comment on this item? Do we have anyone online? We do not. All right, I'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Is there any discussion? Okay, I do have an item in relationship to the presentation. In regard to specifically the frequency on the headways, that has a significant impact on Rockland. And from this chair as chairman, but also from the perspective of a member of our council, and in conversations with staff, I do not believe that we can support moving this forward. And given that we are being asked to not only accept but to support this recommendation, I would ask that we remove the headways from this report, and that if we are going to accept this and move it forward, that we remove that headways piece. Because again, I have difficulty accepting and then indicating support for this, given I know that from staff and from a council perspective, there's little likelihood that it would move forward. So that would be a recommended change to the presentation, but I'll leave that to the board from a motion perspective. I will say that there's been a tremendous amount of conversation. There's been a considerable amount of engagement and dialogue regarding this. We have differences of opinion, and that's been demonstrated here today. It's been demonstrated throughout the process. We have subject matter experts, and when we bring the experts together, we're going to get differences of opinion. I've had the honor of and pleasure of meeting with the team from our Placer Transit, and having them explain to me why this recommendation will enhance, in their perspective, the service when we look at splitting the routes. And I do understand the delays that will be associated with that, but looking at the members of our community that will be served, and I know that has carryover into the other recommendations. So while it's certainly not perfect, I certainly want to see us take steps, and we will continue to look for options that will enhance transit. I can't move forward, at least from my chair, on the headways, and I would ask that we remove that from the accepted document. And outside of that, that is all that I have.
Mr. Chair, if I may clarify, it's the headways for Route 20.
For only headways for Route 20, sorry, and thank you, Mike, for that clarification. Yes.
Can I get clarification? You're asking us to accept but not necessarily approve. So I think in the federal realm, you can get an authorization, but till you get an appropriation, you really don't, you have a conceptual thing. So we're accepting it but not approving the recommendations. I want to make sure I understand the difference between the two things.
Correct. From staff's perspective, the ultimate implementation of the service changes would happen between the local jurisdictions that are receiving those services and our transit partners that are providing those services. Our position is only to accept the document as complete, as well as to support any of those agreements as they are implemented between the two parties, not to supersede them. With that being said, I recognize and appreciate the chair's comments about the frequency matter for Route 20. It is a technical recommendation. The feasibility of it would rely on additional financial sources of money, or as the chair mentioned earlier, shifting existing pots of money to fund those services, which is potentially not feasible at this time. So it doesn't change, I would say, the overall impact of our recommended service changes by removing those frequency improvements or recommendations. I think the critical piece of the puzzle is that split in the route change for operational improvements.
If we don't accept this, is there a risk for loss of funding?
No. I would just to clarify, staff is in full support of the amendment, and what we're talking about is accepting all of the technical service recommendations with the exception of frequency changes on Route 20.
So
And
staff,
possibly Route 60? Or, because Route 60, you were eliminating the trip that will get them there, folks downtown Sacramento at 6:50 a.m.
No, the Route 60, it'll be looked at further in the short-range transit plan. We're still at this phase recommending the service change of eliminating one of those round trips, again, based on current information that we have in data and analysis. The only recommendation I would say that staff is in concurrence with is the chair's amendment to Route 20.
Yeah, yes, I think if staff are supporting the chair's amendment and there is no risk of losing funding, then I can support that.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion.
There you go.
And a second to approve as amended. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed or abstentions? There being none, it passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item on our agenda today is the Executive Director's Report, and that is item J. And Mr. Clark.
Yeah, so I got to go to hot chili. I always want to say hot cars, cool chili, and I know that's wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But boy, I was there and I got to see an old, a nice 1968 442. And for those of you who don't know, my father worked for Oldsmobile for 22 years, so that used to be in our driveway. And I also the proud owner of Ford Bronco, so that's a little professional or a little courtesy there. But I really wanted to talk about just the fact that in the last month, really what we have been more than anything is out in your community. So we continue to interface with the community. We've been at the Auburn Chamber, Roseville. We were at the City of Roseville's Transportation Commission last week, giving a presentation to them. Both Sun Cities, staff attended the Latino Leadership Council as well as the hot chili and cool cars. So really what you've seen from staff over the last month is just a lot of outreach into all of your communities. And just so you're aware, we'll continue to be in your communities next month as well. We'll be at the Taste of Lincoln, the Loomis Fruit Shed Festival. First time ever we're going to Barktoberfest, so that's going to be fun. But a lot of community outreach just relative about our general needs and also relative to the comprehensive operational analysis that Mike talked about, our unmet transit needs, and our active transportation. So in addition to that, I'll point out that we are moving forward with that RAISE grant activity. I did want to give you an update. TFG, our federal advocate, is now under contract. They will support us in the authoring and writing of that grant, which is important. I did have a preliminary meeting with the United Auburn Indian community as well. They are fully on board with support, not only to write a letter of support, but actually work with us collaboratively in DC to help make that happen. And have had preliminary conversations with the leadership at Beale Air Force Base to support as well. So I think we're going to have a very robust grant application. And again, that is to seek $25 million in federal dollars for the 65 southbound. And we will go forward with that and get that into the feds in January of 25. Chair, that ends my report.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt on his report? All right. Next item, board direction to staff. Do we have any direction to staff? All right. We had information. Yes, sir. Sorry.
I just want to, Mike, you did a great presentation. I just want to apologize for yesterday. You have to sit here for 2 hours before you come forward and present. And then you condensed your presentation so we could move on with our business. So thank you. That was very commendable, very commendable.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I apologize, I was late, but I do want to, yesterday was also an important day in one of our board directors, our directors' lives.
They had a birthday.
Was there a recognition of that?
Yes,
Okay. There was recognition. Multiple, oh, yeah, you got recognized yesterday.
You can send me an email. I know you were busy, so.
Ouch.
Oh, Lord.
So happy belated birthday.
I will just note, Director Holmes, that at our next meeting, you can return the favor.
Yeah, we'll be.
Okay. All right. The next item, the informational items were included in our packet. We will now move to our next item, which is adjourning to closed session. Prior to adjourning to closed session, is there anyone from the public here in chambers that wishes to comment on our closed session item, which is pursuant to Government Code 54956.9D2, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to paragraph 3 of subdivision E of section 54956.9, one claim. So is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on this item? No one in chambers, anyone online? All right, we are adjourned to closed session. All right. The board has returned from closed session. There is nothing to report out. And we will move to our next item, which is adjournment. And we will adjourn to our next meeting, which will take place on October 23rd. So we are adjourned. Thank you.
Good job, Mr. Chair.